panel will discuss freedom of expression, what has changed in the last decade. And our speakers here have been engaged in this process within our work. We will discuss generally what has been going on, like the recent interest in international organizations in promotion and the protection of freedom of expression, including artistic expression. We will first give a few minutes for each of our speakers to give us the context of the work and the work that they have been doing within that context over the past 10 years. And we will go into a conversation and a discussion in which we see, is this interest related to an increasing censorship and oppression taking place, or is it related to the increased awareness of these international organizations, to the importance of supporting these groups, or is it both?
Thank you for having me here. This is a really great city, and it's been great to spend the last few times with such remarkable, the last few days with such remarkable people. So, just to give you a little bit of background about me, and in terms of answering the big question of what's changing in the media, I now work for the Open Society Foundation, which is one of the world's biggest private philanthropies, founded by George Soros now over 30 years ago. But I came to that kind of position in a very unusual way. I'm not someone who's from that field. Most of my life I've been a journalist, I was a blogger, and I founded and edited small magazines in Cairo, and I was a correspondent for various publications around the world. And if I have perhaps one claim to fame, it's that for a few years, I ran a blog called The Arabist, which was one of the early blogs about the region. It was written in English, but from Cairo, and was about the region, and was started in 2002, just after the 9/11 attacks. And part of my motivation for starting it was that a lot of the attention on the Arab world at the time was about terrorism and extremism in the Middle East, and obviously there is terrorism and extremism in the Middle East. No one's going to deny that. But it was giving a very partial story to the world about what the region is about. It wasn't giving background on the day-to-day politics of the region, of the struggles that people face there, on its culture, and so on. So it was giving a very unidimensional version, at least in the West, of the region. And I think what was remarkable in that decade, in the 2000s, was that this is the early, still relatively early days of the internet, is that someone like me with very, very limited technical skills, and this is before things like WordPress barely existed and so on, could build a publication with tiny means. I had absolutely no money, I received no funding, it was all done myself. That would attract like-minded people. It had a number of contributors, and the whole thing really was in the spirit of zines, which were these kind of experimental zines that started especially in the 70s, 80s. Counterculture magazines, basically, that came out in the 60s and onwards, and that's with a strong political bent, but that's the approach I wanted to give it. And what I find alarming today is that kind of do-it-yourself, if you build it, they will come type of approach of that early days of blogging. I mean, no one really blogs anymore, but it's has largely disappeared, because in the next few years, from the late second half of the 2000s onwards, the big platforms, the Facebook, the Twitters, and so on, came on and had an ability to reach a much wider audience, and blog really died off. And to me, I mean, just from a personal note, I think that I find that to be an unfortunate development, not only because of the problems that we know about the big platforms and their power with their algorithms to determine what people are reading, the tendency that they have to encourage people to only see content, to live in content bubbles, basically. My first point is that I think we've gone through this period of the mass embrace of social media. And we're now entering at a phase where there's increasing scrutiny and criticism of it. And I think we're on the cusp, perhaps, of the next phase of different ways of doing things, pushing back against the power that the social media platforms have. And maybe a return, and I think you see this spread in the last few years of newsletters, of other platforms that encourage more long-form content. A return of this more kind of homemade type of approach. The context, secondly, is also extremely different in the sense that I think, and certainly at the Open Society Foundations, this is very much the way that we see the world and that we see the role of our support for media within it, is that the media. The situation of media, the fact that the business model for most media has essentially collapsed in the last 15 years or so. The fact that there's increasing public distrust of media, and that you have really most people in the world's consumption of media is dominated either by government-produced or government-owned media or corporate media. That is media that is not necessarily, that is not always in the public interest, let's say, and that it comes hand in hand with a growing trend of authoritarianism across the region, is something that we're very concerned about.
I come from Zimbabwe, it's a country in southern Africa. We were quite famous and well known because we had a president who lasted in power for very long, Robert Mugabe. He was a very sustainable president, if we're going to use sustainability terms. I turned 37 years old and I'd still only known one president my whole life. And that's the kind of the context in Zimbabwe is we've got an authoritarian ruling party. We've been in a political and economic crisis for the last 2 decades. The economy has collapsed. The economy then became comatose. I'm not sure what state the economy is in now, but it's been 20 years of a political crisis, of economic stagnation that's been brought about by a corrupt ruling party, by neoliberal economic reforms through the World Bank and the IMF in the 1990s, and also through colonial power structures that still exist and that are very kind of minoritarian. So it's a country where activists get disappeared, where journalists get beaten, where even political satirists who use humor get abducted and threatened. Magamba, we started it back in 2007. The whole idea being about trying to use creative forms of activism to reach young people and to inspire them to be part of the struggle for social justice and for freedom of expression. Magamba means freedom fighters. It means freedom fighters or heroes who are trying to reclaim the language of freedom fighters that our ruling party uses. They fought a liberation war in the 70s, and they still monopolize the fact that they are the only freedom fighters, the only heroes in the country. So we started Magamba really to try and use different forms of creative activism, different forms of popular culture, of urban culture that can reach young people where they're at and can get them involved in the struggle to build a more participatory democracy, to build a country with economic justice.
The Digital Empowerment Foundation works in the whole country. I don't know how many of you have a context of the country. We are a country which is like a country, 35 states, then divided further in 753 districts. Each district is the size of a European country, and which is further divided into 250,000 village councils, which is further divided into 750,000. And in the middle of all that, last 1 decade has gone totally, all decision making has been happening from digital perspective, in terms of policies, in terms of access, in terms of anything, and extremely top down, and in such a way that the decision makers assume that everybody is connected. And therefore, I would also like to give you a context that even though we can say that India is one of the WhatsApp countries, out of 1.3 billion people, we don't have a smartphone penetration of more than 500 million. And therefore, the WhatsApp penetration would be almost like the same. It's not a lecture on WhatsApp, but I'm just saying that's the most used, access to information. If you have a freedom to access to information, that's the mass media that you access. And every decision is made from the perspective that, if you want to say something, if you want to consume information, if you want to express any information, you will have to find out a way to say these mass media. And ironically, if you relate freedom of expression with rights, which is basically right to information or right to food or right to education or right to health or right to food, and incidentally all these rights I'm saying is a right in India. But the point is, they are also subject to access facilitation. I have right to education, but I don't have access to education. I have right to food, but I don't have access to food. I have right to information, but I don't have access to information because all the information is in digital format, in a web format, which is not available in my language, and so on and so forth, right? And this goes on. I have right to food, but I can't access it because unless real-time internet-enabled biometric check my fingerprint, I cannot have access to my food. And all this is because Digital Empowerment Foundation works to enable this access at a last mile. At the same time, we keep bothering about, do we have freedom to have expression? And then there is this dichotomical situation that do I serve my people to have at least basic information, or having necessary access to information, or should I bother about freedom of expression, which is more media-centric, which is more right-centric, which is more, governance-centric. And in the middle of all that, that is where we work. And why it is contextual is that at any point of time in India, at least 700 to 800 million people have no access to information.